Because in 1970s, you most focus on about Gombe, about your chimpanzee study. Then suddenly you jump out to care the bigger world.
That was in 1986.
Yeah. So what happened?
What happened was that the big book that I wrote, The Chimpanzees of Gombe, which took about 2 years to write, and it was all the first 20 years research. And then one of my friends in America, who was head of the Chicago Academy of Science, he said, we should celebrate this with a conference. So he wanted a conference about the great apes, and including paleontology. I went to the conference. So I went as a scientist, really thinking I'd probably spend the rest of my life at Gombe, and left as an activist. It just like that. And at that conference we had a session on conservation, and it was shocking seeing, everywhere where people were studying chimps, the numbers were going down and the forests were being destroyed. But I didn't quite know what to do. So got some money, visited the chimp sites, realized what was happening, why they were decreasing in number, but learned about the problems faced by the African people. Learned why. People say, was it a tough decision? It wasn't a decision, it's something that happened.
So during the transition, what's the biggest obstacle you have to overcome?
Well, for me, the most important was alleviating poverty, so that the people found ways of making a living without destroying their environment. And they realized then that saving the environment wasn't just for wildlife, but for their own future. Reaching the tipping point in 5 years. That doesn't mean it's all over in 5 years. It means it will be very, very hard to slow down climate change if we don't take action now. I'm getting older, there's less time and so much to do.
The sense of urgency. When it started, the sense of urgency become more pressing.
Oh, I think it's come gradually, don't you? Gradually over the last 10 years, maybe 20. The species disappearing, the climate heating up, the frequency of hurricanes and storms and floods and droughts, the conflict around the world, the civil unrest. I mean, all of it is, and people losing hope.
When did you first realize that hope is so important?
Way back in late 1980s, when I was meeting young people who said they were depressed or they were angry, and that's because they said we compromised their future and there was nothing they could do about it. So yes, we've compromised their future, but I reckon there was something they could do. And then it all became very clear that if you lose hope, you become apathetic, you give up, you do nothing, and then we're doomed.
So for you, for the past 5 decades, the world become better or worse?
Worse. On the other hand, awareness has grown up, particularly among young people. They're much more aware of the need to. But unfortunately, in some of the very elite communities, like I won't mention places, but children growing up with very rich parents who just swan around private jets and everything. Those children, they don't know. They don't realize the harm that lifestyle is doing to the planet. So getting to them is important. Equally, it's important to get to the very poor, to, somehow give them some hope.
So when deal with the politician or business leader, what do you get from them? How do they think about the world?
Well, the business leaders, I talk to them quite often. And some of them, without question, are really, really trying to become more sustainable. And my favorite story is a CEO of a big international company. And he said, Jane, I really have been trying for the last 8 years to get my company sustainable in the countries where we get our products, in the supply chain as much as possible. That's difficult. In our offices around the world, and in the way we treat our customers. And he said there were 3 reasons. 1, seeing the writing on the wall. We're using up natural resources in some places faster than nature can replenish them. 2, consumer pressure. People are beginning to ask questions. How was this made? Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals, like factory farming? Is it cheap because of unfair wages? But he said, what tipped the balance for me was my little girl, 10 years old, and she got back from school. She said, Daddy, they're telling me what you're doing is hurting the planet. That's not true, is it, Daddy? Because it's my planet. That
wow,
did it.
Very touching.
You see, that's how you have to go. You have to reach the heart. It's no good trying to argue and fight because they're not going to listen, these people. But if you can sneak into the heart. But how do we persuade governments? How do we persuade business? They don't seem to care. Oh, I'll be all right. I'll be dead before it gets too bad. But don't you care about your children? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, it may never happen. You know, I mean, I heard with my own ears, President-elect Donald Trump said, climate change is the biggest hoax in human history. He said that.
Yeah.
And he's going to be president. And his chief advisor will be Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the only person who's attacked me on social media because when I'm talking about the problems we face, I always say to have unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources and a growing human population doesn't make sense. We've got 8 billion of us roughly on the world today. The 2050 it'll be about 10 billion. What's going to happen? I've never said more than that. And Elon Musk accused me of wishing for human genocide on social media. He's going to be the main advisor to Donald Trump. I mean, what do you do? And then all these political leaders, they all get together and they make their little plans, and it's like I'm reminded in Shakespeare's, we petty men creep under their huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. And so I just thought, that's exactly what it's like.
So many people feel so powerless.
Yes. Makes the job of somebody like me very difficult. And still, I must give hope, because if people lose hope now, then of course we can't do anything about it.
But in 1930s, 40s, it's more harsher than now, I guess. The World War II.
What was I, 10, 11, 12, the end of the war. And the images of the Holocaust came out, the torture. And that made a deep, deep impression. I learned about human evil for the first time. And I began writing poems about it. And I began lying, thinking, how would I withstand torture? If I was being tortured to tell about something, would I be able to withstand it or not? So it was a grim time.
So for today's world, what's the biggest threat of evil in today's world?
Well, probably what really upsets me in Palestine, in Gaza. I think that's just, I mean, so many children killed, thousands of them, bombed, destroyed. That has to be evil, doesn't it?
So what's the best solution or attitude towards evil?
Conquering it somehow. Go back to the Lord of the Rings. Sauron, the Dark Lord.
Yeah.
And the orcs. It is really, it's almost like a whole scene of today. So we need, so we actually talk about this, when I'm talking about particularly the environmental problems of the world. And, there are people with the Jane Goodall Institute, with Roots and Shoots. And so I say, we've got to grow the fellowship. Lord of the Rings is Fellowship of the Ring. Well, we haven't got a ring, but we need to grow the fellowship to fight the Dark Lords. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I say to people sometimes when they say, well, I don't have hope, but I'll go on fighting anyway because, as I've always said, supposing there isn't any hope, which I really don't believe. I believe there is hope because I think we're beginning to wake up. But suppose there wasn't. Isn't it better to die fighting for what you believe in than just to give up and let your last days fade away and eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die?
Because you said you like the Lord of the Rings very much. So if you were in book, what kind of role you would play? Frodo or Sam or Gandalf? Which one you want to play?
I didn't ever want to play any here. I just admired them or hated them, depending.
It's also about how people live in the dark times. So what did you get from the book? I mean, about courage, about maybe dilemma,
persistence, hope. I mean, Frodo and Sam attempted the impossible, and that's one of my reasons for hope. The people who attempt the impossible and are told that they're stupid, but they succeed.
How literature experience shape your scientific discovery?
I don't know that it did. I mean, even as a little girl, I was out in nature watching birds and insects and squirrels and, loving to be out looking at the colors of the autumn tree and the little buds coming out in spring. And that tied in with poetry very much.
Who is your favorite poet?
Probably Keats.
Keats.
Yeah.
Lots about nature, about the birds, yeah.
I used to read Shakespeare all the time, and then poetry. I read a lot of poetry, and I loved it.
How does this kind of experience change your maybe scientific training?
Because I haven't had scientific training. I'm much more romantic than a scientist.
Yeah, actually, you're a romance-driven person, actually.
Scientific method, the way I use it's fine, but scientific method, being objective and cold, that's led to a lot of cruelty. Your animals are just subjects. I was told we were not part of the animal kingdom, we're separate. That's rubbish.
这次美国之行，从哈佛到 New Orleans， 像我对自己青春志向的某种，好像又是觉醒，又是重新的确认，这么一个过程。这次觉醒你会有更强的中国的意识，就是我处在一个什么样的视角和一个背景，我的社会最需要什么？可能我在20多岁的时候是模糊的对这一切感兴趣，其实你对中国的背景也并不清楚，其实完全是两回事情。他被认为是一个社群主义的一个代表人物，他的整个的思想成熟之后，82年写出第一本书之后，他这个之后的整个人生经历是跟整个的里根撒切尔这一套就是全球化和新自由主义这套兴起有关系的，他成为这样的一个浪潮的一个批评者。 这个批评当然有它的很多道理嘛，但是就是很有趣这个过程。我们这一代，包括这2代中国人，是这个所谓的这个潮流最大的受益者。包括他在批评的是绩效，他的暴政。那中国一直是贤良选拔，对我们中国人很尊重所谓的科举制度，尽管它有各种各样的问题，不管它是不是单一，他仍然认为是这个社会流动性的一个重要的保证，而且可能某种上最公平的一个保证。所以我觉得这是不同的国家之间的差异吧。我们这叫等待哲学是吧？等待哲学。是从那边过来的。It's raining again.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. So, do you like this?
Yes, I watch from your YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. Here it is.
Who's James Otis?
He was a leader in the colonial times during the time of independence.
Is he a good speaker?
I don't know. I don't know.
Wow.
And then this was built as a monument to the Civil War. It was after the U.S. Civil War.
So the name is on the wall. It's all about died.
Yes. Yeah.
For Civil War. Can we go to steak?
Yeah. We can.
So why dialogue, debating is so important for society?
It's how we come to identify the meaning of justice and the common good. We have to ask the question, what is justice? What is a good society? What is the meaning of a good life? What civic virtues should we seek to cultivate? So if we care about bringing about justice and the common good, then we're kind of propelled into a dialogue about what justice and the good life really are. Because, of course, there are, and have always been, competing ideas about the meaning of justice and the common good. That's why the great philosophers of the past, Plato, Confucius, Aristotle, and so on, they had different ideas. And those who followed in the Western tradition, including John Locke and John Stuart Mill and Kant and Hegel and Marx, they all had different conceptions of the meaning of justice and questions of the good life and of civic virtue. If they disagreed, it's not surprising that we disagree. And yet, what's interesting is we have the sense that those arguments, though they seem impossible finally to resolve, they keep going. And they keep attracting our attention. And we want, in each generation, to figure out for ourselves what it means to seek a just society, what it means to aspire to the common good.
So if we were in the stage, I mean, the great soul, that Kant, Marx, they're all alive, actually.
Yes.
Interact with each student, with you.
Well, that's the idea. That's the fundamental idea, that these great philosophers are not just episodes in the history of ideas. They're not just museum pieces. They are episodes in arguments in which we are still engaged today. So that if I do my job well in teaching philosophy to this generation of students, they will feel as if they are in conversation with Plato and Aristotle and Kant. And because philosophy is a tradition of thought and argument that builds upon and refers always to the past.
You think why? Public philosophy is so important for society.
Public philosophy is an attempt to find meaning together that is not purely technocratic, not purely practical, not only about economic questions, but about larger questions too. It's because we've been so preoccupied with GDP, with markets, with economic growth, and with technology. And it creates a moral vacuum. And unless it's filled with deliberation about public questions, it will be filled by narrow, intolerant, dangerous ideologies. And that's my worry. Let me give here one recent example of this. During the pandemic, in many ways, the pandemic highlighted inequalities that existed before the pandemic. A great many of us had the luxury of being able to work from home during the pandemic, to teach from home, to work from home, to write from home. Delivery workers, grocery store clerks, warehouse workers, truck drivers, nursing assistants, home health care providers, child care workers. Now, these are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our societies. But for a moment during the pandemic, we called them essential workers. We applauded them at the end of the day. We put up signs thanking them. This could have been a moment for a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and recognition into better alignment with the importance of the contributions they make. But it didn't happen. The pandemic receded. We never really had that moment. And now we've gone back to business as usual.
So you think meritocracy is part of reason?
And I think the answer to that question is connected to the widening inequalities of recent decades, and also to the changing attitudes toward success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. Over the past half century, really, those who've landed on top have come increasingly to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the bounty that the market bestows upon them. And by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate as well. It produces a kind of hubris among the winners and humiliation among the losers. It teaches the winners, if I believe that I achieved whatever I achieved through my own efforts, through my own doing, because everything was fair, then I'm likely to inhale too deeply of my own success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped me on my way, to forget my indebtedness to those who make my achievements possible. And so this is what I call the tyranny of merit.
Bring Michael Jordan here, I'm sure you can get him, and have him come and defend himself about why he makes $31 million. And I think what you're going to realize is his life was a very, very tough one to get to the top, and that we are basically being the majority oppressing the minority in a different light. It's very easy to pick on him. Very easy.
Effort. You know what Rawls' answer to that is? Even effort depends a lot on fortunate family circumstances for which we can claim no credit. Psychologists say that birth order makes a lot of difference in work ethic, striving, effort. How many here, raise your hand, those of you here who are first in birth order? I am too, by the way. Mike, I noticed you raised your hand. If the case for the meritocratic conception is that effort should be rewarded, doesn't Rawls have a point that even effort, striving, work ethic is largely shaped even by birth order? Is it your doing, Mike? Is it your doing that you were first in birth order? So why should income and wealth and opportunities in life be based on factors arbitrary from a moral point of view? This way of thinking about success has deepened the divide between winners and losers. It has led the successful to look down on those who struggle, and it has led many working people who do not have meritocratic credentials of fancy university degrees to feel that the work they do is not valued, is not respected in the way perhaps it once was, to feel that in a highly technological, highly professionalized, credentialized society, that elites look down on them. This has always been present, always been part of the American story, but it's been, at least at times, kept contained underground at the periphery. The brighter ideals and aspirations predominated. When I was growing up, and through the 60s, for example, the civil rights movement, and the fight for racial justice, and the protest against the war in Vietnam, and the attempt to combat poverty with the Great Society. But from 2016, it became elevated with the presidency of Donald Trump. We've struggled more directly and more conspicuously, more frontally with the dark side, finding public expression.
On the stage now.
On the stage, public expression, rather than kept at the margins and at the periphery. And finding a voice in the media, and in social media especially. And now in a presidential campaign that will be a rematch of the one from last time. We've seen as a backlash against elites, especially against well-educated elites, professional elites. Donald Trump has been very effective at tapping into the grievances of people who feel they've been left behind and looked down upon.
Humiliation.
The politics of humiliation. And it's this sense of humiliation, I think, that opened the way for the politics of grievance that Donald Trump has been able to exploit. In the United States today, and in many parts of the world, is a politics of anger, resentment, and grievance without mutual recognition, without recognizing the value of the contributions that people make from different walks of life. We will not really begin to address the resentments that now afflict our politics and have accentuated some of the darkest strands in social life.
我想大家去国子监，在中国这个 meritocracy 是这么的受尊重。你知道梁启超他去那个访问澳大利亚的时候，因为澳洲人怎么理解他嘛？举人对他们就翻译成那个 bachelor， 就学士学位，他们的进士是翻译成 master degree， 然后他不是当过长沙实物学堂的那个总教习嘛，就翻译成 president of Hunan University， 翻译成。所以很逗。 最误读。我真的挺想带去看国子监的，这特别对着他这个写的书的感觉，加上拼音线。